teach me how to duck.
I love it. DJ C-Divine, you are always keeping us upbeat during the middle of our intermissions. We are so, again, excited to have you all joining us for our Men Who Enterprise Summit. And I'm excited about our next panel, talking about all things education and workforce development. I'd like to now introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Dr. Shaun Nelms. Dr. Nelms?
Good morning, Natalie.
Wonderful. And we have Dr. Gregory Vincent as well. Matthew, was Matthew on? And Dr. Jean-Claude Brazard. Wonderful. Good to see you all and have a fantastic panel.
Thank you. Well, I had to tell you all out there, Zeke had Dumars, he had Rodman, and he had the microwave. I have my starting lineup here as well. I got to tell everyone out there listening that this is a complete honor to be speaking to these three gentlemen. These are giants in their respective fields. And for those who are not familiar with them, you will learn a ton about them today. And we're going to honor this 30 minutes and get in as much as we can. I'm going to encourage all three to go as deep as possible in your responses. Let's give the people what they want. First, I want to introduce Dr. Gregory Vincent, who is the former chairman of the Grand Boule, my Archon brother, executive director for the Civil Rights Initiative of the Civil Rights Initiative and professor at the University of Kentucky. Welcome, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you.
Next, I want to introduce my former boss. That's right, he hired me, he plucked me from a suburban school and put me in an urban setting. My friend and colleague, Jean-Claude Brazard, who's a senior advisor for P16 Community Investment Team, the Office of the President in U.S. Programs for the Gates Foundation. Good to see you, Jason.
Good morning, Dr. Nelms.
And then a brother I have met in the last 2 to 3 years who has opened up my mind and my heart and my soul to education from a tech side and has introduced me to a ton of professionals who are doing incredible work in this field. This is Matthew Mughal Fields. He's the General Manager, Supplemental and Intervention Solutions for HMH. Welcome, Matt. So let's get this started. I'm going to ask each of you to take 1 minute or less to share with us something that has inspired you to enter the field of education and the responsibilities of your current role. And I'm going to start with Dr. Vincent.
Thank you. And let me just say to my dear sister, Natalie, thank you for putting this all together. You've been a boss for so long. We love you, we support you, and keep doing what you're doing. And to our moderator, Dr. Nelms, we thank you as well, and to my fellow panelists, we appreciate you. In the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision, the court said two important things. No person could be expected to fully participate in our democratic society without access to education. And education equals good citizenship. It is the very foundation of our society. And so that inspired me every day to live and to fulfill the promise of Brown and our democratic society.
Thank you. That's extremely powerful. I'm going to go next to Jean-Claude Brazard. Same question.
Morning. Thank you. Good morning again. So, Shaun, if it's okay if I change your question a little bit, because I sort of, education was supposed to be a temporary stop for me while I was going on to medical school. I have a degree in chemistry. The science is my background. I was assigned to teach at Rikers Island in New York City, and met a young man who changed my life. 19 years old, could barely read, couldn't do any math whatsoever. By the end of one semester on that island, this young man was doing pre-algebra. I had not attended school since the 5th grade. And that changed, frankly, my trajectory in my career, in my life.
Well, if you know JC, you know any question you ask, he's going to flip it anyway. So I appreciate that, man. Be real, be authentic. And again, I want us to go deep and not be political and not be politically correct. Like, let's speak from the heart and speak our truth to power. All right, Matt, same story, man.
Yeah, so my career has been largely about an effort to pay forward what was done for me by a group of educators who stepped into the life of a then young, free lunch immigrant kid who the system had said, needed to pursue vocational education. They thought differently and ensured that I was given the experiences to not only go to college, but that same group of educators actually got folks in the community together and raised money and paid for me to go to Morehouse College. And before I left, said to me one simple thing: now go do for others what we did for you. And my journey as an education entrepreneur started in trying to answer that challenge. Wanted to be an entrepreneur since the paper route days, but had this requirement that entrepreneurial activity had to be tied to repaying that debt that I owed. And so when I got to Morehouse, started tutoring kids in my dorm room, went through a path of being both a teacher in public schools, but also a management consultant in business, and found a way to marry together passion and drive for entrepreneurship and innovation with education, and led me to start a couple of successful businesses in the education field. Went out to Silicon Valley, started an education technology company grounded in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Fortunate enough to sell that business a few years ago, and have spent the last few years in my current role leading what is probably the fastest growing, largest education technology business in K-12 education.
Man, Deep, I love that comment. Go do for others what we've done for you. I think that captures all three comments perfectly. And I think it's something that drives each of us as educators. Let's expand upon that and the comment that Jean-Claude made about his experience at Rikers Island. And the question is, as we all know, access to quality education is one of the great equalizers. It can be one of the great equalizers in providing access to upward mobility. And now more than ever, we are seeing great divides between students from underinvested communities and those who are not. Education delivery via technology has created its own set of challenges and opportunities for both students, practitioners, and resource providers. What are some challenges you are seeing and ways you and your organization are working to address them? I'm going to start back with you, Matt, on this, since this is one of your areas of interest in your current work.
Yeah, as you know, Shaun, I spend a lot of time working with great people here at HMH, focus on exactly this, these challenges, right? If there is such a thing as a silver lining out of this COVID tragedy that has been inflicted upon the whole world and disproportionately so in communities of color in the United States, if there is a silver lining, it's that we are finally taking some serious steps to address what's been called the digital divide for many years. So this is the notion that some kids had access to technology, devices, connectivity, et cetera, to do their work. Some people talked about it as a homework gap because so much of work in schools is happening online even before the pandemic. Well, the pandemic has just accelerated all of those sort of trends. One way to think about what COVID has been, and this is generalizable to the economy, is one of my favorite thought leaders, Scott Galloway at NYU, talks about this notion that take whatever trends were happening and reach out into the future 10 years and pull it back to today. That's where we are in every area. And education is the same way. So we now have, we're approaching 1-to-1 device to student ratios in US public schools. Prior to the pandemic, we were at 2-to-1. That's a massive sort of sea change in possibilities. And if I were to, sort of connect that back to the mission of Walker's legacy and today, is I would just be, strongly encouraging many of us from our community in particular to not only view education as an opportunity to do good and for us to put more people on a trajectory to success and viability and middle class and all that stuff that we all want, but also view it as a venue for innovation and entrepreneurial exploration. Because the game really is changing. I can get into all the details of how instruction is changing and all this stuff, but I'll leave it there for now.
I gotta tell you, it wasn't until I met you, Matt, some years ago that I really understood the entrepreneurial side of education in a way that was not about taking advantage of marginalized youth, but using innovation in education and entrepreneurship to enhance their lives during school and further in life. And so I appreciate that because that's part of my education upbringing that I had no clue about. I just taught, coached, and that's where I thought we lived. And there's a much bigger world out there. So I want to transition to Jean-Claude, because he's done the superintendency, the teacher. He's a self-proclaimed scientist, and now doing some incredible work at the Gates Foundation. So I would love to hear more about what you're doing to bridge that technology divide. And then I'm going to ask Dr. Vincent about what he's seeing at the higher ed space and how that's supporting students who are entering the higher ed continuum. Jean-Claude?
Shaun, thank you. It's important to perhaps talk a little bit about the worlds I've been a part of and what I'm seeing now. So I've led systems in New York, Rochester, led Chicago Public Schools. My work right now at the Gates Foundation is focused on what we call P16 education. So I lead a team that really is looking at pre-K through post-secondary education. And we focus on Texas, Tennessee, New York, and Washington State. What we are seeing, and by the way, we spend about between $400 and $600 million a year on U.S. education every single year in terms of grants and support for systems. What I'm seeing makes me hopeful, but terrifies me at the same time. Let me start on perhaps the younger end. We're seeing massive learning loss of what we're calling the COVID slide. That is real. We're beginning to see data come out in the fall, really demonstrating what kids have lost, frankly, because of homeschooling or remote learning. I'm seeing systems where folks cannot account for up to a third of their students. They have no idea where they are. They've not logged onto any system whatsoever. And if you saw the recent report from the National Student Clearinghouse, about a quarter, when you look at community colleges, enrollment is down 25%. And we're seeing enrollment down four-year institutions. And we know perhaps in some cases, kids are taking a year off. But in many instances, especially the community colleges, where these kids are not coming back. And we know which kids, frankly, are most impacted. The fact is that we've got a huge problem. What's making me hopeful is that the work we're seeing in our communities, and that goes from Buffalo, New York, all the way to Dallas, is that the work we're seeing around this kind of whole community effort is that the school system, the P through workforce, P through post-secondary work, is sort of encased in this kind of collective support that we see in communities. If I were to use perhaps Dallas and Buffalo as examples, what I'm seeing is a lot of effort around the high school to post-secondary space. That has been a challenge, frankly, in our world for a very long time. But when you see the kind of collective effort by business, by non-for-profits, by education institutions coming together to make sure kids are transitioning well. In the case of Dallas in Texas, we're seeing a push for automatic enrollment for kids from high school to post-secondary. So there's a lot, these kinds of efforts in some places are really bearing fruit. We're also seeing, Matt, to your point, innovative perhaps approaches to curriculum and pedagogy in schools. At the same time, we're seeing systems really, really struggle to address the basic needs of kids. So what's making me hopeful, frankly, is perhaps the silver lining in all of this in COVID that folks are responding to. At the same time, I really fear we are losing a big chunk of our generation, especially poor Black and brown kids in this country.
That's deep. Yeah, I mean, that gives an entire continuum from P to higher ed. And so I want to go to the higher ed space. And Dr. Vincent, again, what do you have to comment on these comments from both Matt and JC?
Well, I so appreciate my fellow panelists and how they've tied technology to equity and opportunity. So I really thank you both for that. I am so honored and excited to serve as the inaugural executive director of this exciting partnership between the NAACP, the preeminent civil rights organization that was founded in 1909, and the University of Kentucky that had a history of exclusion and has dedicated themselves to being a place of access. And this partnership gives us an opportunity to provide reliable, evidence-based research and practice to help educational spaces promote civil rights and equity. And the conversation early with Rick Raid and Isaiah was so powerful. And Isaiah mentioned Thurgood Marshall and his mentor Charles Hamilton Houston, and to give a shout out to our sister Natalie from the great Howard University. Morehouse. I've written many checks to Morehouse, Matt, but I'll share that when you think about the NAACP in the 1930s, think about where we were as a people. There were so many issues we were facing. We had issues of lynching, racial restrictive covenants, employment discrimination, voter suppression, white racial terrorism. And the NAACP dealt with all of those issues, and they focused on education. They understood that if we could provide equitable education to our people, there's no limits to what we can do. They had a significant focus on higher education. And of course, what Dean Charles Hamilton Houston did to produce a generation of lawyers who dismantled Jim Crow segregation. So this partnership between the NAACP is so very critical to freedom. I would also say, since we're in an entrepreneurial space, that civil rights and equity is good for business. When I tell Fortune 500 companies to mom and pop businesses that civil rights and equity are good for business, because we've seen the other side. And we have to distinguish, in my mind, between what is legal and what is just. And I often have shared that some of the most heinous acts in modern human history have happened under a legal regime, whether that's slavery, whether that's voter suppression, Jim Crow, the Holocaust, apartheid. All of those things happen under a legal regime. So we have to fight for not what's just legal, but what is just. And so what we're doing in the higher education space is making sure that there's full access and equity. There's a huge effort to reject this anti-affirmative action that's happened in California that's denied access to brown and black people to flagship universities. But the most important thing that we're doing is providing access to make sure that every student can meet their potential. One of the great things about historically Black colleges and universities is that they make dreams come true. They make pathways where folks can do what they want to do, when they want to do it, and how they want to do it, and even in spaces that they didn't know existed. So one of the things that we're doing in the higher education space, while we ensure that there's access to flagship public universities, we also support our historically Black colleges and universities. There's also a very strong effort to produce more Black teachers. We all remember teachers that we had and that were so important to us. And we want to be sure that we produce more Black teachers to inspire the next generation.
Okay, listen, I want to take the next 15 minutes or so, I think we have about 15 minutes left, to really lean into the hashtag Men Who Enterprise. Because I think that's the purpose of today. We have many different sessions following ours are going to talk about the importance of enterprising, in our case, in education space. So this is going to be a question for you, Matt. I'm going to start back with you and then kind of work back through the panel. Mm-hmm. What role does educational institutions play in developing curriculum and fostering spaces for students to create and explore so that they themselves could become successful entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think the short answer is a vital role. I think that whether it's in terms of direct exposure to all forms of entrepreneurship and innovation, and I'm using those terms very deliberately because I don't necessarily believe that you have to be an entrepreneur to be a creative problem solver or an innovator, right? I think the world needs more of that. And so I'm gonna selectively interpret the question even more broadly than perhaps it was intended, and pull in a JC move on you. So I think essential that we recognize that in the sort of hyper dynamic, if you will, hyper connected 21st century world, that equipping learners and learners, sort of cradle to career, as JC has said, with the ability to learn, to innovate, to deploy the tools of the 21st century economy in their service and in the service of their communities is essential. It is not optional. It's in many ways increasingly a survival skill economically in so many different vectors and sectors. And so you know, what once was the province of an elite few needs to become mainstream and needs to become part of the DNA. And look, when you think of, you know, cultural competency, particularly in the Black and African American communities, we have tremendous reservoirs of creativity, right? It showcases itself in so many different places, and this is yet another area to do that. I just strongly encourage folks to take on this notion of innovation as a muscle and learn the skills, you know, learn how to do this. The one of the myths of entrepreneurship, one of the myths of modern day sort of venture capitalism, innovation, is that it's a singular brilliant individual on a stage, you know, wearing a black turtleneck or whatever, that creates the powerful changes in the world. That is a myth sold to you by marketing departments that want you to buy their products. The real way that companies innovate is there's methodology, there's science to this. There's a very deliberate process that you can deploy and that can be learned and can be replicated. Folks just got to do it. And you know, one good example is, you know, read the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's a great book. It outlines sort of process of how you actually create innovation. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
I'm telling you that, listen, the disadvantage of being a moderator is I can't take notes. I usually be on my computer right now. The chat is blowing up. So please throw your questions in the chat and put your comments. People are saying, yes, yes, yes. I'm doing this work for Netflix and I'm telling you everything he's saying is right. So please overshare, you know, keep it going.
Shaun, can I jump on that if it's okay?
Absolutely. You know, you're up next.
No. So that is so well said, Matt. But let me just add a few layers to what you're talking about. The fact is, whether or not you're starting a new company or you're going to work for Netflix, as I saw in the chat, or Facebook, or the Gates Foundation, the fact that you have to be creative in being an entrepreneur exists in all facets of life, all facets of work. One of the things that I worry about is that in so many of our schools, especially in poor communities, we put math and reading proficiency as the goal for every kid. I can tell you, look, I have 4 children, one, you know, in school in Chicago, in university in Chicago. The fact is that my goal for them in life is to be successful, to be the entrepreneur, to be really be creative and to be happy, right? So the math and reading proficiency I see as a means to an end. One thing we've been talking about a lot lately in our schools is this idea of social emotional learning. People sometimes think it's a nice to do to get kids to feel good about themselves. The fact is, when you look at the folks who are successful at Facebook, successful at Netflix, they bring that kind of mindset, development, and skill to those places. They are creative, they're entrepreneurs. When they walk into a room, they can argue a strategy. They can sit with 4 people around a whiteboard and argue a point. They have the empathy, they can listen, they can contribute to the conversation. So what I'm pushing very simply is that the work we do in K-12 around social, emotional, academic development and what you see around workforce skills and workforce development, workforce needs are not different. It is a continuum of development that has to begin, frankly, from cradle all the way to career. And this is what I'm seeing in the best systems. Look, kids who go to the best private schools in America, you know, are getting that kind of development. They're being forced to be creative. They're doing makerspace, all that part of in stuff. You walk into our poor schools, say, I don't know, some parts of Chicago, some parts of New York, some parts of Rochester, what you see is a bit of drill and kill around math and reading, yet the kind of creativity we know is so critical for success in life is not developed. So what Matt is describing, frankly, has to be part of our curriculum. It has to be part of our pedagogy to really get kids to know how to navigate the world and become, frankly, the architects of the future of our country.
So Dr. Vincent, I'm going to give you an opportunity to either build on this question, or you can talk about what this education looked like in the post-COVID era. Your choice.
Yeah, let me quickly hit on both because these points are so very powerful. One of the most important parts of our work with this partnership with the NAACP and the University of Kentucky is to inspire and empower young people. We want to channel that true great American patriot, the late John Lewis, in inspiring young people. And we believe that it's our job to not just hold on to the power and the legacy of what we used to do in the good old days, but to make sure that young people understand they have the power right now to do the right things the right way. And as Rick and Isaiah said earlier, move from protest to policy and execution. In this space, one of the two important tracks that we are focused on, one is health and wellness, right? Because we know you can't do anything unless you're mentally, spiritually, and physically well. So wellness is a key part. The other part is what you all are talking about, which is entrepreneurship and financial literacy. We have to make sure that our young people understand the whole game, right? You know, Jay-Z was mentioned earlier, and one of the things that I often share is one of his great lines is that I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman, right? And we have to help young people understand those things. And so for my children, we made sure that they started their own businesses, right? We wanted to help them understand this. And the point that Jean-Claude and Matt mentioned about giving time for innovation and inspiration. That's why music is so important. And that's why so many of these activities are important. And so for us, we have to make that happen. Yesterday, we had a webinar with the National Medical Association. Let me put some respect on the NMA's name. They were established 30 years after slavery. So in 1895, we had a critical mass of Black physicians who established an organization to protect the permanent interest of wellness for our community. And they have been thriving and working ever since. And so we partnered with them to talk about, you know, best strategies. And let me just share what came out of that. One was to respect the science, right? You know, don't fall for this nonsense. You know, respect the science. You know, engage in respectful, mature, behavior. So those things were really critical. We have to tap into the entrepreneurial space to ensure that we remake education. You know, one silver lining in all this chaos is that we can disrupt how things have been going, and we have an opportunity to create new opportunities for young people in the educational space. So that was something that was spoken of as well. And the most important thing is that we have to love our children. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, that our children need to know that they're loved and respected and they have choices and opportunities, and that these barriers are artificial and don't define them. And that's why, again, what the panelists have said, what Isaiah and Rick were saying was so critical. Because once you learn that, there's no barrier to your success.
All right, so I'm gonna do some rapid fire questions because we have about 3.5 minutes left. All right, so the first question I want to ask, and this comes from actually the Q&A. So I want to honor those who are participating in the Q&A and in the chat. Keep those things going. We can't get to all the questions, but we're going to try to get to as many as possible. Really quick, rapid fire. Please share success, habits, routines, and important decisions you have made that has led to your success. This comes from Malik Crowder.
Brother Crowder.
I'll start.
Oh, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
No, you go.
No, just very quick. My brother Malik, it's always good to connect, and thank you for your support of Black male students at the University of Texas. We love you. We appreciate you. I would say becoming proficient in something. I think it's so critical to learn the discipline and put time on task to become proficient, because once you become proficient, then you get the confidence you need in order to thrive in this game of life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Same question, Matt.
I would say mine your pain for purpose. There's so many of us. I have a, I'm going to get back in my soapbox. There should be more of us building and running businesses in what is the second largest sector of the US economy, which is education, for those of you who didn't know that. There should be more of us developing the expertise in an area that is so critically important to our communities and to the world. But many of us are on a hunt for, what we think is quick success or success looks like, because we saw it from somebody else in other areas, and we over-index on other parts of economic pursuits. Search for what created challenge in your life and see if there's an opportunity for you to, in helping others alleviate that pain, there's not something you can create that creates a lot of value for society at the same time. So don't run from it, dig into it, and figure out what can be created from it.
Jean-Claude.
And very quick, just to add to that, network to build your social capital.
That's right. I love that phrase. Your network is your net worth. I will say this to each of you. The advice I would give is to find someone to challenge you in understanding your purpose in this space. And for me, it's been brothers like these three who shared so many gems today, but it's also been individuals like Natalie Cofield who always pushes and challenges me to think about how I can move from being in my role as superintendent and my role as a researcher at the University of Rochester to be of greater impact in the education world around me. And I thank her for challenging us. I thank her for giving us this space to be able to have these meaningful conversations, and her commitment to ensuring that women and men become the best they can be in business and in life. And so thank you, Natalie, for organizing this event. And I encourage everyone to stay on throughout the day. I just cleared my calendar to hear from some of the other panelists throughout the rest of this afternoon and this morning. So one last thing, we have a minute and a half left. I thought we did. Was to ask, well, never mind. Go ahead, Natalie, take over.
No, go ahead with your minute and a half. That's fine.
That's right. You're taking my time. I want each of the panelists to quickly give the name of one person that we should be interested in knowing more about. So in the spirit of trying to share knowledge and share resources, name someone in your field or a related field that we must go out and discover to enhance our own intellectual capacity. Matthew?
I would say a brother by the name of Dr. Shaun Nelms. He's doing some fantastic work that you ought to Google him, look at the work he's doing in Rochester, look at the ways in which he has implemented a fulsome community-based turnaround of a challenging school environment. He is an exemplar of innovative leadership.
Checks in the mail, brother. Dr. Vincent.
I got to give a shout out to my brother and fellow professor, Dr. Ivory Tolson. He's done path-breaking work on ensuring that we have evidence-based research and practice around uplifting Black people generally and Black males specifically.
One of the greatest leaders I know in education, Jean-Claude Brazard. You ended. Thank
you. Maybe I was going to pick Dr. Shaun Nelms as well, but instead I'll push you guys to read the book written by Walter Isaacson called The Entrepreneurs. I think that'll give you a lot about what it takes to be successful.
Okay, back to you, boss. Sorry, Natalie.
No problem. Again, thank you so much to our education and workforce development panel. We appreciate your insights, Dr. Vincent, Jean-Claude Brazard, Matthew Muego Fields, and Dr. Shaun Nelms. We appreciate your time. We are now going to move into a brief intermission. Feel free to chat and network with your fellow attendees in the chat section. We'll be right back after this brief intermission with another Power Panel.